Hello there, everyone, and welcome to this week's Asia Stories. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Caitlin Byrne. I'm the director of the Griffith Asia Institute, and it's my great pleasure to be here today. I'm stepping into the shoes of Professor Renee Jeffrey and filling her spot this week. She's been doing an amazing job bringing a whole lot of research stories to us from across Griffith University. And so it's a great pleasure to be standing in for her this week. Before I begin formally, let me first acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. For me, the Turrbal and Jagera people, but of course, you know, many people are joining us from many lands across the widest reaches of this virtual platform. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that to all First Nations peoples, including those who might be joining us today. And today I'm really pleased to be here to be able to introduce Nico Meissner, Dr. Nico Meissner from the Griffith Film School. Nico is the Deputy Director of Teaching and Learning in the film school and senior lecturer who has been with Griffith for a couple of years but came to us via Malaysia and with a really interesting background and a really fabulously fascinating research story and experience that's taken him across Southeast Asia. So Nico, welcome to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Now, I was reading your bio and we of course have worked together, and so one of the things that I'm so pleased, that one of the reasons I'm so pleased you're here is because I've seen how you're able to bring stories to life through film. And we're going to get into a little bit of that in terms of one of your projects, 27 sketches of building and sustaining filmmaking careers across Southeast Asia. We'll get to that in just a second. But before we get to that, I'm really interested, having looked at your bio, you know, you began with your PhD in the UK, you've spent a couple of years in Malaysia and working on collaborative projects that involve USC, the University of Southern California, and others. Tell us how all these dots make sense. Join the dots for us and tell us a little bit about your career and how you've come to be here at Griffith in the film school.
That was all a very great master plan that I laid out as a child. No, I know that was all, you know, as so often happens in life. Things just happen. I studied actually in Perth for a year when I, you know, Germany likes to send its students out and the government pays. So I thought, how far can I go? And I went to Australia, and from there I went back to Germany, and then I did my PhD, my master's first, and then my PhD in the UK. And my partner, who I met in Perth, is Malaysian. And at the end of my PhD, we were expecting our first child, and as it is, so then you sort of like wonder where do you want to live, and we didn't have any support in the UK, like in terms of my parents live in Germany, hers in Malaysia, so we went for Malaysia, and I just, as you do when you graduate, I guess, from a PhD, you just email everyone, and I emailed everyone that had sort of like a media department in the larger sense in Malaysia. And I was really, really lucky because at that time, the Malaysian government had a new economic plan, and they identified eight sectors that they wanted to push and invest into. And all of these 8 sectors got a big industry player, but also an educational institution attached to it. And the plan was to build up the southern part of Malaysia, Johor, next to just opposite of Singapore, and establish what was called Edu City there. And so one of the 8 sectors was the film or the screen production sector, and Multimedia University, which is the first private university in Malaysia, and they were quite successful with animation. They were asked to build a film school there, and it was one of the universities that I just emailed, but they, you know, they had animation, I guess, expertise, but no film expertise. So I just stumbled into that place at the right time. and the academic consultant of the program was the University of Southern California, which is one of the oldest film school. It's an amazing film school. So we designed the program together, and then I ended up heading the program once it was established, and then the school once it moved down to Johor. And then I thought, cannot retire when you're in your 30s. And so
no, it's probably not realistic for any of us as academics, but yeah, sorry, go on.
And then I came from there to Australia, which was also which was also a coincidence. So I never looked to apply for anywhere else. It just so happened.
It's interesting you say that. I was involved this morning in a session with some PhD candidates and we were talking about goal setting and time management, and I think a couple of them might be here in this session, and it's great to talk about goals, but it's so interesting how so much happens accidentally in our careers, and I think that's something we can all learn from. Yeah, I guess it's being open to the opportunities. And was there anything about Griffith Film School that drew you to this part of the world, or just an opportunity that popped up?
It was kind of like coincidence. Like ever since I studied in Australia, I really liked Australia as a place, and I thought it's a great place to bring up kids, but also to grow professionally. And I sort of was, in a way, Malaysia came a bit too early for me in my own development. So like I grew so quickly, and then I was running a school, which felt way too early, and so you're in a position where where you have to, you should learn more before you're in that kind of position, I felt. So and Griffith, like again, I didn't seek it out. I did research. One of actually an Australian who ran a studio here at the Gold Coast, and then built up a film studio, Pinewood Studios in Malaysia. We worked quite closely together, film school and the studios there. And he told me to do some research on the Korean Academy of Fine Arts, which I did, but the website is only in Korean. And so I stumbled across Select, and because they're part of Select, so Select is the Global Association of Film and Television Schools. And Griffith, because Herman as the head of school is chair of the Asia Pacific region, advertised a job in head of screen producing. I didn't quite know what that meant, but I thought I'd just test the market and apply, and that's how that happened.
And here you are. And one of the things that I think has been really fascinating, looking at your work as a filmmaker, sort of working in the medium of film, your primary subject seems to be other filmmakers. Is that a fair assessment?
For this project, yes. But this project more comes out of, I was a film student myself in the UK, and I was an early career filmmaker, I guess, during the global financial crisis. That's why I ended up in academia. And then I was, very involved in the Malaysian film school, and then here the question is always, there is no linear path into especially a film career. So it's not that you do some tests and then all of a sudden you're a filmmaker or creative or a journalist. I studied journalism. It's the same there. So I was always fascinated with what happens after, right? After film school, you get trained and you have a certain, I guess, identity about yourself, and then you're thrown into this completely different world, and you kind of like gotta swim in some form. So it's just a coincidence, but yeah, a lot of my research is actually on early career filmmaking.
And I guess I should actually just note we've got a couple of people joining us from the film school, so great to have you with us, and I hope we'll be able to keep working and keep bringing some of these stories through Griffith, through the Asia Stories series to light from the film school. But let's turn now to Paths Untold, which is really at the centre of your story and in particular your research in the region. And through this project, you were really trying to create a series of portraits, I guess, of 27 independent filmmakers from across Southeast Asia, and you've really been able to highlight at least one filmmaker from across the 10 Southeast Asian nations that make up ASEAN, for example. And it's really fascinating. And I should just mention, you might see we'll pop a note in the chat that directs you to the website where you can actually find the microfilms documenting each of these portraits. It is absolutely fascinating to watch each of the filmmakers talk about their story. And I know when you were in the blurb around it, you talk about stories of film and filmmaking and place, but it strikes me there's so much more to it, you know, and different stories delve into different aspects of race, privilege, power, voice. And I think we'll get to that in a second. And I should note, for people who want to ask questions, we'd really welcome them. Please use the chat function at the bottom. I should have said that from the very beginning. Tell us how you got involved in this, Nico, or where the initial idea came, and why Southeast Asia?
Yeah, I mean, so I had this natural link to Malaysia because of family, but also because I work there, and I still have a lot of very close friends in Malaysia. And these questions around career building, what happens after film school, is you know, if you're sort of like responsible for a program or a school, these are just the questions that you ask, and yourself. And every time when I was in Malaysia, I thought there was this, while I was in Malaysia, I always thought there was this very romantic, almost can-do attitude of sometimes not second-guessing things, but just doing, all right, just making. And so when I came to Australia, it's the same questions here. The students have the same questions in terms of how, and the students are attracted to the same stories. The students are always attracted to Hollywood because that's what we watch, right? That's what we grew up with. And I don't have statistics, but that's probably just the truth for, I don't know, 1%, 0.5%, probably less, of the screen professionals around the globe. To me, the reality of a career in the screen industries is much more Southeast Asian, and in a way, Southeast Asia is just this geographical framework that I could give it because I like the region, and it's kind of somewhat similar to Europe, where a lot of cultures live together and try to, I guess, advance together. So that's in a way just a framework. But I think, and I think that's my big thesis, if you want, of this. I think that that the stories they're global stories. They could happen in Brisbane. They could happen in Europe. These are basically stories of film careers outside of huge global or national centers of film production. So, like our students here at GFS, they also look to Hollywood or Sydney. That's where the jobs are, right? But their lives and careers in screen industries here in Brisbane, just as they are in Hanoi or Kuala Lumpur. Yeah. They're just less celebrated, but they're very real.
So one of the participants, and I can't remember who it was that said this, I'm just looking at my notes, that there is a story around every corner. Maybe it was Adam from Thailand. There's, and I thought that was so interesting, that it was just looking at the stories that are around you, that are local, that are about your place. One of the things that did strike me is how important place was, and I think the question of Hollywood came up a couple of times, where that Hollywood didn't seem to have as much of an attraction necessarily than working locally.
Yeah, so that was fascinating. I don't want to. It's difficult to generalize, I guess, those stories. But obviously, I met all of them in Southeast Asia, and maybe a third of the filmmakers I interviewed had studied overseas, or lived overseas, or grew up overseas for some reason. And I asked everyone whether they would live overseas for whatever, for career, whether they would leave their place for better opportunities. And all of them kind of, I think all of them kind of like said, this is my place, this is where my stories are, this is the place I know. I couldn't make a film in France because I just don't understand the culture. I don't, it's not just a language thing, it's understanding the culture, it's understanding the people and the stories. So even Myanmar as a place, you know, that of course changes a lot. And we talked a lot about censorship and working in a potentially quite restrictive system. And that's the first place where we would think, well, if offered the chance, people would probably want to leave. But they all sort of said, this is a place where I can actually make a change, and a place I know, home, right? It's home.
So that's really fascinating. And I guess you've just highlighted a couple of points there. And, you know, thinking about Southeast Asia, what a diverse, you know, incredibly dynamic kind of region to be traversing through film and in terms of talking to filmmakers. I mean, were there challenges that you had to face as you embarked on this project that really took you across each nation and through each of the capital cities? How, for example, did you identify the participants for this research?
So I started quite mathematical.
Right.
I looked at the ASEAN nations, and I got a new research grant from Griffith. So I applied for that and worked out the budget, and I thought, oh, I can actually go to every country, and it's quite inclusive in a way, or diverse, for one of a better word. So I looked at every capital city just because that's mostly where the cultural hotspots are, but they were also most accessible to me. And I left Brunei out because I didn't think there would be film industry in Brunei. I only then learned, so that was kind of like the starting point. I don't wanted three per country. So. Right. That was the goal. And then I started reaching out. Obviously, I knew people in Malaysia, so I didn't need that much help in Malaysia. For the other countries, I tried to identify in-country experts, usually people that work at a film school, at a center of film education, but some educational, you know, that we have similar, I guess, backgrounds, me and the in-country expert. But I also had colleagues here in GFS that know the region quite well, and so I just asked for contacts, and that's how it happened. That's also how I discovered that there actually is that there are films being made in Brunei. And you know, and then I just included a 10th country. And in the end, I had 3 per country. Some, like in Thailand, for instance, I only got my 3rd interviewee while I was in Thailand already, and spoke to one. Like during my first interview, I mentioned that I'm kind of like short one because one canceled on me. Yeah. And I found a 3rd one, but it worked out quite well. Only in Laos I have 2, but those are 2 very, very important filmmakers that kind of like started up the Laos new wave in 2012. And in Brunei, I only have 1 person, but you know, I didn't think there was any film being made there, so I learned a bit there.
Well, exactly. And the texture across the filmmakers and their own stories is really fascinating. The fact that you've got some award-winning, I'm thinking Anthony Chen as an award-winning filmmaker. You've got some who may be less known, but let's just come back to, is it Maddie from Laos? You know, she had a really fascinating story. I wonder if you can just delve into that a little bit. Tell us about her story.
Yeah, she had a very long story. Like when I transcribed her interview, it was 9,000 words. So,
wow. Yeah.
So Mattie has an interesting story. I'm not sure where she was born, but I think her brother, at least, was born in Laos, in Vientiane, and that was a time of civil war, and they actually grew up just across the border, I think in Thailand, across the border in a refugee camp. And then the family immigrated to the US. So Mattie might have been born, but at least she grew up in California. And then traveled with the entire US, but she never had a film background. And her partner is a scriptwriter. So when her mother passed away, And her mother was quite a successful businesswoman in California herself. And then everything was taken away from her at one point. So there was quite a rags to riches story in there as well. So, but when her mother passed away, her mother's last wish was that Matti takes care of her father, and her father wanted to go back to Laos. And Matti has never been in Laos.
Yeah, that's amazing.
She came back, she brought her partner, and there they were. And they just stumbled into people, the old government department. They made newsreels and documentaries, like 5 or so a year. Not much happened. And they were all trained in the Soviet Union. So she stumbled into those people, and they said, "We want to make films here. Can you help?" And she just said yes. So it's one of those kind of examples where she really had very little experience of making films, and then she made 3 feature films now, and these are the first films, allow films that have been distributed internationally. So she premieres at sci-fi festivals in the US. It's a nice story of just grabbing an opportunity.
And then there are the stories of those that are working within countries where censorship is extremely strict. And I'm trying to think of one of your participants from Vietnam who talked about the fact that his film was ultimately banned. And it was slated for a showing in Venice. He wasn't allowed to go. So it must be, I think you really drew out some of the restrictions that apply to filmmakers across the region. Did that worry you, dealing with their stories or bringing their stories to light at all?
It worries me now a bit because I'm in the final process of locking off a book, so their stories will appear in just the edited interviews in a book for Routledge, and some of the Myanmar stories really talk about government and the military not necessarily knowing what they were doing, but still, so they made a film on Cyclone back then, and the government was in 2008, and the government was really completely against that, and they weren't discovered, and they had to be anonymous, I guess, in the credits. I think it's all open knowledge now, but those kind of, so Myanmar that happens, and Vietnam is probably slightly less restrictive, but I interviewed 2 filmmakers in Vietnam whose films got banned, so they weren't allowed to show them in Vietnam. But like, I think I didn't know these things when I was seeking out the filmmakers. I just wanted to talk to people that kind of like make screen media in those countries. So the stories, like, I was usefully naive going into that, and then also surprised about a couple of things. So I'm running the interviews through as many of the filmmakers as I can. Some of them don't check their emails, I guess they don't. But no, most of them read through the interviews, and they don't highlight that it's a problem. So I guess it's okay.
Yeah, and it was just, if you look at the different stories, what people were trying to show through their film also differed. And, I think Snow, for example, in Myanmar talked about bringing women's voices to the fore, that women didn't have an opportunity to have voice in community. But that, I guess, brings me to the method that you're applying. And we talked about this a little while ago, how you weren't necessarily on a mission to find out certain things. This was really a process of bringing stories to light. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, when I did my PhD, I tried to find the 10 rules of how to build an audience online. And I did have sort of 10 rules. So I think often, like in academia, we try to find the truth and averages and rules and laws, right? And that's good. That's great. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm not smart enough to find those things. I do think that there is a lot in individuality and in individuals, in individual stories. So in a way, the working thesis was always that no career is the same in the film industry. So I would kind of like do myself a disservice if I try to find rules or laws, like a step that everybody went through, unless you go really wide in a way. And then, you know, when I was finishing film school, I specialized in editing, and I found this book by Roger Crittenden, who, complete coincidence again, is an adjunct professor at GFS, so, who interviewed European film editors on their career, on their craft, and it's an interview book. And there's no huge academic contextualization of this thing. It's just 30 or odd stories about editors editing. And you know, I rediscovered the book lately, and I made highlights. Right, I highlighted certain things that were relevant for me in the book. So in a way, this project was the same. I just really wanted to talk to 27, 30 people and listen. I do think listening is underappreciated as an art, and sometimes I don't know. I give you long answers, but I never really feel like I have that much to say. I always find it more fascinating. It's more convenient for me to listen to people, and I learn more when I listen. It's a bit selfish, but the idea here was to listen. You know.
Well, I think it's come across brilliantly, and I'm looking at the chat, and I can't see any questions coming through. So please, please do put any questions in. We've only got a few minutes to go, so that's to the audience if you'd like to ask Nico a question. But I could talk about this for hours because it's so beautifully put together, Nico, and you have done a great job of listening. But I think you've also done a brilliant job of bringing place to life. And you know, I particularly enjoyed the clips of the Vietnamese filmmakers, just because it gave this view of the streets of Hanoi, the side alleys, the shops, the motorbikes. And I think that's the case through most of those clips. Did you do the filming, or how did you pull that side of it together?
So, you know, when I pitched the project, the idea was to get the story. So I wanted to get the interviews, and I always wanted to put the interviews into a book. It's kind of like the stories. But I also, because I work at a film school, I also wanted to film the interviews. And the original plan was to do a 30-minute interview documentary on each country. And then I sat down with my cinematographer, who is a very talented graduate from Malaysia, who went to the film school when I was there. So we worked together, and we discussed the approach. And she kind of like said, who's watching half an hour sit down documentaries? Nobody does that. And also those stories are in the book already in a way. So we then developed sort of like an approach that the films are less stories and more snippets, more emotions, I guess, more trying to, I guess, capture the emotion of the place, but also the people in the film, and not in an exotic way, not showing palm trees, but really trying to find the reality of those people, and you know, where those careers are lived. So the cities. And for me, like when I lived in Malaysia, it was always, and I went to a lot of concerts in Berlin when I was a student, and that sort of like alternative culture scene exists in Malaysia as well. If you know, it's not as widely known as in Berlin, but it exists if you look into the right pockets. And so that was kind of like what we tried to discover: the skate parks, the cafes everywhere. The clubs, didn't find that many, but in Manila we found. But the alternative local culture, because we believe it's global. Again, it's kind of global. And then the way, so again, we worked with local fixers that could kind of like show us creative spaces in the widest sense. But also, so my cinematographer was Malaysian, so she, of course, has a very different way of looking at things than I as a European. And all my editors, I had 5 or 6 editors. They were all Malaysian, and one from Indonesia who was a student here at Griffith. But they were all Southeast Asian, so it's all their place in a way. And it's funny that you pick out the Vietnamese ones, because the two Vietnamese films are the only two films that were edited by my cinematographer. So that's kind of like, it's all completely her vision. She filmed it and then she edited it together as well.
Well, I can absolutely tell you that right now, when none of us are able to travel, especially into Southeast Asia, they just, you know, it made me really nostalgic actually for being able to be there and walk the streets. It's very real. I think that grittiness of just day-to-day living comes through it. So congratulations on that. I know that through some of the different stories, you know, people gave some insights into who inspired them, and those answers differed right throughout the stories. But I wonder, who inspires you?
Who inspires me? Oh, that's a good. I have different. So, like Roger Crittenden's book was an inspiration for this. There's another book called. How's it called? Do you have it here? No. Ways of Seeing by John Berger.
Okay. Yeah.
Who you know, who writes a lot about the power of images, but he also has a visual essay. It's just a chapter of pictures. So I have that. I got a Routledge to agree to printing 30 black and white pictures. So I have a visual essay in there. But you know, when I looked for a title of thing, and it was always called. The book is called Independent Filmmaking in Southeast Asia, which is the most boring title ever. But that's what Routledge told me I have to call it for discoverability purposes. When I settled on a title for the project, it was called Paths Untold, which is horrible for German to pronounce. But that is based on Parts Unknown.
Yeah.
So cheesy, by Anthony Bourdain. So like, and that is, I liked Anthony Bourdain's approach. It's again this bit underground culture, very people centric, and I guess enjoying the streets, and not celebrating anything as exotic, because then it's always different, and it's special because it's different, but celebrating everything for, you know, for just because it is, just because it exists, and we're all similar in a way.
And it's so accessible when you look at it through that lens. Now, I do have a question here from Margaret, and she asks, given your findings with these emerging filmmakers, what learnings do you think we should take into our teaching with emerging film students at Griffith Film School, and the importance of their place in Australia?
Margaret, we have these discussions every day. It's quite it's interesting. There are two answers. Caitlin, you and I, we talked about that as well. And one of my big answers, and I realized that in Malaysia already when I worked there, is Malaysia is not Hollywood, right? So we were consulted by the University of Southern California, and they have this, they're so opinionated about how they teach, and it all makes so much sense. And it took me 2 years or so to realize, but we're not in Hollywood, right? And I'm somewhat proud of that realization, to very long. But I do think that Brisbane is also not Hollywood. So in a way, the digital age makes media so accessible, and in a way everybody can almost be a filmmaker. But film education is built on like the University of Southern California is almost 100 years old, and they were one of the first film schools, and they are really built on what we call the six-pack of film education. So they reflect the specialization, the highly specialized film industry. You either train as a director or a cinematographer or a writer or whatever in one thing, right? And then you go into the industry and you start at the bottom and you work your way up in your one niche. And I don't think that's how careers work at the periphery, if you want, in smaller centers of film production. I don't think that's how careers work in Southeast Asia. I think they're much more multi-skilled. You basically, you just gotta get a project up, and then you write and you direct and you produce and you shoot it yourself, you edit. Matty Dose makeup in her films, because that's what she was trained. So you just do whatever you do in order to get it done. And that's an entrepreneurial skill. And so I think multi-skilling on entrepreneurial skills are much more needed in film education outside of the centers of film production, so outside of Sydney here. But I also think, so to come back to the question Margaret asked, so the other thing that to me is important is, not currently because we cannot travel, but we grow together more and more. All these Southeast Asian filmmakers, they build their careers, as Malaysian filmmakers, as Singaporean filmmakers, but really as global filmmakers. And so they were good at identifying their own story, which actually, so I'm learning, we're all very shy to tell our own stories. We think it's not worth anything. We think other people's stories are worth more. So I think that's really important in film education, to train that. And that was, in Malaysia, that was so difficult, because when I taught in Malaysia, to start making students proud of their own culture. But, in the end you get there. But also how to function in multicultural, such an overused term, but how to work with others that are not from Europe, like how to work with indigenous people in Australia, how to work with immigrants, it's such a potpourri of cultures where we live in, whether it's Southeast Asia or it's Australia, and sometimes it's difficult for us to realize our own voice, but also to accept everybody else's voice. And so as a training institution, I think that's really important, to look beyond, to understand who we are, but then also look beyond who we are.
Nico, I feel like we've had a masterclass with you today, so thank you. It's been really good to hear from you. I'm such an admirer of your work and love working with you. So thanks for being part of Asia Stories. I think that's time for us, and look forward to catching up with you again and to our next Asia Stories next week.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.